I don't know if it's more or less than most. I think this time of the year, every year, we start seeing a lot of crazy stuff coming out the day before. And especially this time of year, you have to view everything through the prism of who does this benefit? Whose agenda does this cater to? Who wants this out there? So a lot of gamesmanship this time of year from teams. But it's fun. It's hard to believe it's less than a day away, and tomorrow at this time will just be hours away. But yeah, I always say I think back to the Edgar Allan Poe quote that's after this time of the year, believe only half of what you see and that you hear. So I tried to stick my head in the sand the day before the draft because there's a lot of misdirection flying around.
Scott, how many guys have you graded as first-round grades in this particular draft?
Well, I always take the approach, I always give out 32 first-round grades because there's 32 first-round picks. So I always give out 32, but you've heard some teams talk about as few as maybe 15 or 16, and I think that we're going to see a lot of action in that back half of the first round, maybe some teams trading up from early second round to the back end of the first to if they're targeting a specific player. But I think after you get past a certain point, especially outside of the 1,000 picks or so, you can kind of throw the next group of 20, 25, 30 guys into a hat and shake them up. And there is very little difference between a late first rounder and a late second rounder. There's going to be a lot of guys going in the second round that people feel or they themselves think are going to be a first round pick. There's just only so many slots. So I'm just marveling, even as I'm working on my final mock draft here, some of the names that are available well into the second round.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. He will have his final mock-up tomorrow before the draft, and if he gets that done, Scott and I will have a final look at the draft tomorrow. First, Scott, 19 and 20, 12 and 20, I should say, 12 and 20 from Cleveland. Good enough to get to number 2, in your opinion?
I don't think that's enough. I think the Titans are holding out for the Godfather offer. They want at least 3 first-round picks, and I don't know if anybody's going to pay that price. And honestly, I don't think they should move the pick. If you're the Tennessee Titans, when's the next time you're going to be in position to add a potential franchise quarterback as talented as Marcus Mariota? Is it a risk? Sure, it's a risk. Anytime you take a quarterback in the NFL draft, there's risk involved, except in the case of Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. Those guys don't come along every year. So I just think the Tennessee Titans, you have to take that chance. And I think they're coming around to that realization too. And even though he's maybe not a perfect fit for what Ken Wisenhunt wants to do at that position, coaches come and go. Coaches are a dime a dozen. You only get so many chances to add a potential franchise quarterback, which is not only the most valuable commodity in football, but maybe the most valuable commodity in all of sports. And I think as the draft continues to get closer here, the Titans are maybe just realizing, hey, we might not be absolutely in love with this guy, but we got to take a swing. It's better than just standing on at the plate with with the bat on your shoulder, because if they hitch their wagons to Zach Mettenberger and he struggles this season, everyone's getting fired anyways.
No doubt about it. That's an interesting way to look at it. And at this time, is it most likely, in your opinion, Scott, that Tennessee would draft Mariota and then could potentially move him? Is that their best case scenario?
I think it's a possibility, because I think a lot of teams are looking at the situation and they say, well, Mariota's not a fit for Wisenhunt, and they might decide to call the Titans bluff if they don't really believe the Titans want Mariota for themselves. So they might have to pull the trigger and kind of prove it to other teams, because otherwise we know the Jaguars aren't taking a quarterback at 3. We know the Raiders aren't taking one at 4, and it's a lot cheaper to trade up to number 5, and the Washington's open for business at the 5 spot. It's a lot cheaper to go up there than it is to number 2. So I could very easily see that. And I don't think, if there is a trade, I don't think it's going to happen until the Titans are on the clock at the very earliest, because if you're the Browns and you're making this deal to go up for Marcus Mariota, you're going to want to make 110% sure that the Buccaneers don't pull a surprise and take him number 1. So if there is a deal, I think it's going to be while they're on the clock or maybe a little after, but I think Mariota is going to be the second overall pick one way or the other.
What are you making of all this? I know you said believe half of what you see or hear and all that stuff, but the final week here in the final hours, what are you making of all of these different people coming out and connecting Chip Kelly with Marcus Mariota?
I mean, is that anything new? I mean, I think we've been hearing that for about a year. And I don't think the Eagles fans are going to give up that dream until it's actually over. And there's always a chance. I never say never in the NFL draft, but I've maintained all along it's unlikely. I mean, if the Browns can't get a deal done with 12 and 19, Philly sure isn't going to get one done with Sam Bradford and the 20th pick. So I think it's highly unlikely that the Eagles would absolutely have to mortgage their future. I mean, I think you're talking more than 3 first-round picks to go from 20 to 2. So I just don't see the Eagles having the ammunition to get it done. Even if they could get, say, the 12th pick, not even the second first-round pick of the Browns, the highest one, 12, for Sam Bradford and do a 3-way deal, 12 and 20 still isn't enough to get you to 2. You're still talking another first-round pick. So I just think it's unlikely. But
what about a report here that the Eagles were set to send Bradford to Cleveland for 19 and then take 19 and 20 plus Kendricks and Cox to 2? That enough?
Well, Cox makes it intriguing. Kendricks, I think, is basically a throw-in at this point. I think the Eagles are ready to move on from him, so I don't know if there's a significant amount of value there with him. But certainly Fletcher Cox is one of the better young defensive linemen in the league, and you can make an argument, who would you rather have, Fletcher Cox or Leonard Williams? You might go with the established guy, although Cox is getting to the point where he might start to get expensive as well, so I think that's a factor too. So I think if they're willing to deal one of their best players, then you might be talking. I think Fletcher Cox is probably the equivalent of a first-round pick, but boy, I mean, talk about mortgage in the future, though. You're really going on a limb if you do that, trade one of the best young D linemen in the league. So I'm skeptical. Like I said, I've learned never to say never when it comes to the NFL draft. And I'd love to see it as a football fan. I'd love to see what Chip Kelly could do with Marcus Mariota, but I'm skeptical.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com with us here. There's a lot of people who have mentioned mortgaging the future, Scott, and a lot of people would say that's giving up a lot of picks. You know, you're giving up too many people. Other people would say if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have your future. When you go up to go get your quarterback, he becomes your future. So if you give up a Cox to get a quarterback who's your franchise quarterback, is that a good move by Philly?
Oh, well, and I agree with that. I'm of the opinion that there's no price too high to pay for a franchise quarterback. And if Chip Kelly truly believes Marcus Mariota is this transcendent talent who's going to get him to the Super Bowl, then he should give up whatever it takes to get Mariota. Because, like we say, a quarterback is really all that matters in the NFL. So if Chip Kelly has that kind of conviction, he should make the deal. But on the flip side, Washington thought that too when they traded all those picks for Robert Griffin III, one of it which wound up being the second overall pick in the draft last year. And Washington still hasn't recovered from that. And not only has that hurt their depth and their young talent and their salary cap situation, they still might not have a quarterback. So it's a huge risk if you do it. But if Chip Kelly is that confident in Marcus Mariota, he should do the deal. I would rubber stamp it in a heartbeat because, like I say, there's no price too high to pay for a quarterback. And that's why I didn't really criticize the Browns that much for taking Johnny Manziel where they did. I didn't criticize the Bills for reaching for E.J. Manuel or the Vikings for Christian Ponder, even though I didn't agree with those moves. I don't like to criticize a team for at least trying at the quarterback position. I'd rather see them do that than spin their wheels with Alex Smith or someone like that, or Brian Hoyer, or like the Rams have been doing, all those opportunities they squandered to get a good quarterback. So I'm never going to criticize a team for trying. And I just go back to, like I say, if Chip Kelly is that convinced about Mariota, he should pay whatever it takes.
I'm looking at a couple of different people who cover the draft. One says it would be the least surprising move of the draft, for the Browns to move up there. Others would say same thing about the Eagles. At this point, which team would you label as the favorite to land Mariota? Who wants him the most?
I would say that Browns are definitely the favorite because they have more ammunition. They have 12th and 19th. So I think the Browns probably have the best stockpile of assets to get that deal done. It's just a matter of whether or not they're willing to pay the huge price it would take. And then the other factor, too, is by offering that second first-round pick to the Rams for Sam Bradford before he got dealt to Philly, I think the Browns have showed that they're motivated to upgrade at that position. And I don't blame them. You cannot rely on Johnny Manziel. He's got to be a non-factor in their decision-making at this point. So that's another situation. I wouldn't hesitate if I were the Browns to give up at 12 and 19 to move up for Mariota. But now you're talking about throwing in other premium draft picks, future first-rounders, and in addition to those two number ones, then I think it gets a little bit shaky. But I think if somebody was going to trade up, I think the Browns are the most logical team.
We're talking a lot about Mariota. Is it, in your mind, a slam dunk that Winston goes number one?
Well, like I never say never, but it's pretty darn close. I think the writing's been on the wall for a long time, and if the Buccaneers are truly sold on Jameis Winston, the person, then it's a really easy decision because on the field, there's no question he translates better to the next level. He's more of a sure thing on the field, and like we've talked about too, the crazy thing is for some of the stupid decisions Jameis Winston has made off the field, on the field he is the consummate field general. He's extremely intelligent. He's a hard worker. He's a leader of men. He's got ice water in his veins. He has all those things you look for. So if the Buccaneers really are comfortable with Winston, I have to think they are. They've had more than enough time to do their due diligence. They had somebody following him around as he travels around the country. They know they've done their work on Jameis Winston, and I think it's a worthwhile risk at the top. It's a risk, sure, but I think it's a worthwhile risk.
Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com on 97.3 ESPN. Former Eagles executive Joe Banner tweeted out recently about an hour ago, "No doubt in my mind, Philadelphia will try to trade up for Oregon's Marcus Mariota. I know it's expensive, but let's not act like it can't happen." At this point, many people think it would be almost a disappointment, but do teams realize this and say, this guy wants this guy, we're just going to jack up the price to almost make it impossible for him to get?
Absolutely, and I think that might have been a factor in the use of praise of Sam Bradford when they made that deal to try to throw teams off the scent. And I don't think there's any question Chip Kelly would love to have Marcus Mariota. I don't think anybody disputes that. It's just a matter of whether they're willing to pay the astronomical price it's going to take up to move up from 20 to number 2. I mean, you think back, it cost the Washington 3 first-round picks to move from 6 to 2. So just think what it would cost from 20. But, yeah, there's no question in my mind, and I just hope Philly fans aren't setting themselves up for a letdown because I just think the odds of Mariota ending up in Philly are pretty slim. And could it happen? Sure. Anything could happen, and if they're willing to pay whatever it takes, a deal can get done. I mean, we saw Mike Ditka and the Saints, they gave up their whole draft to get Ricky Williams. Anything could happen in the draft, but I just think Chip Kelly – I just don't think he believes he needs to do that for a quarterback. I think he believes he can manufacture production at that position, and he has the past couple of years. They haven't had a superstar quarterback, but they've had no trouble scoring points. It's stopping other people from scoring points. They need to keep their picks and bring in defenders and try to get a defense that can come close to matching that prolific offense.
I'll ask you about a couple players in a bit, but I want to ask you first, in your opinion, Scott, who's the safest pick in this draft? Who's the safest guy in that top 10?
Well, the easy answer is Leonard Williams, a defensive lineman from USC. He's my top player in this class and the only guy that I gave my elite 5-star grade to. But going down a little bit, I'd probably say Brandon Sheriff, the offensive lineman from Iowa. And he might not be Orlando Pace or John Ogden or that type, but I just don't see any way that he's not at the very minimum a good starter in the league, whether it be a tackle or guard for 10 to 12 years. So if I had to bet my life savings on one player, I'd probably put it on Sheriff.
Obviously, there's been some interesting news coming up to this draft. What about Ray? What happens to him now with this late news that came out on him?
Boy, he's got a lot of stuff working against him right now. And honestly, I thought the top 10 talk was always a little overblown. And even my most recent mock draft a couple weeks ago, I had him falling into the 20s because putting aside this most recent thing, first of all, he doesn't have the prototypical size and length you look for. There's concerns about whether he can play outside linebacker at the next level. He might just be a 4-3 situational pass rusher, and I don't know how early you want to take a player like that. Third, he's got a health issue. He's got a foot injury that some teams feel might need surgery and put him out for a while. And then on top of all of that, the week of the draft, he gets pulled over for driving erratically at basically sunup and gets cited for possession of marijuana in the car. Oh, and teams don't care about guys smoking marijuana. They really don't. They are realists. They understand. They're concerned about the decision-making, that you would put yourself in that position, the biggest week of your life, millions of dollars on the line. I think Shane Ray could very easily drop out of the first round. And I think Brandy Gregory from Nebraska has a better chance of going in round 1 because not only is he a better player, but he's only got the one thing really working against him, whereas Shane Ray has 3 or 4. So just really poor decision-making by Shane Ray, and it's going to cost him.
All right, we're talking with Scott Wright, DraftCountdown.com. The Eagles are at number 20. Let me throw a couple guys in that area. A lot of people split on Landon Collins at Philadelphia 20 for that system and that fit. What about you?
I don't think Landon Collins is going to go to Philly. I don't think he's the type of safety they're looking for. Even though they're technically looking for a strong safety, they want a guy who can cover. If they did go safety at 20, I think it would be Demarius Randall from Arizona State, who I think is going to be the first safety off the board because he's a much better coverage guy than Landon Collins. Or in round 2, I think the Eagles could target a guy like Eric Rowe from Utah, or maybe even in round 3, an Adrian Amos from Penn State. So I think those are the types of guys they're looking at that position. But I tell you, working on this final mock, there was no pick that I had more trouble with than Philly. In my initial list of options for them, I think was 7 or 8 deep. And I mentioned those the safeties. I could see them going to receiver, Nelson Aguilar from USC, Jalen Strong from Arizona State, maybe a blocker like Jake Fisher from Oregon, another former Duck to shore up the middle of that offensive line. I just think maybe a cornerback like Kevin Johnson from Wake Forest, Byron Jones from Connecticut. I just think the Eagles could go in so many directions with that pick. And honestly, I applaud anybody that one because I really think it is a toss-up. Chip Kelly has been kind of a wild card. And now that he's got full control, I'm not sure we know exactly what he's going to do. But I will preview for my final mock draft. I went with Nelson Aguilar, the wide receiver from USC, but I can't say there's any high degree of confidence there. I wouldn't be shocked if it was one of 5 other guys either.
Over under 5.5 wideouts in the first round.
Well, it kind of depends on where the run starts. And if a wide receiver doesn't go either 3 to the Jaguars or 4 to the Raiders, I think they might all slide a little bit. And that includes maybe even someone like Kevin White or Devontae Parker. So I think there's a good chance that we could see some receivers that we expect to be first-round picks still available early in round 2. But in my final mock draft, I'm just doing the count here, I think I have 3, 4... I think I only have 4 going in the first round of my final mock draft. So I went on the low side, and that was the one thing that surprised me when I was working on this final mock. I had fewer receivers than I expected and more offensive linemen, and I won't be surprised if that's the way it ends up. So if you're looking for a wideout, you're still going to be able to get a pretty good one early in round 2.
Will a third quarterback sneak into the first round?
I don't think so, but and that's another thing. You never say never because we've seen some crazy things at the quarterback positions in recent years, whether it be Christian Ponder, E.J. Manuel, and the supply is not meeting the demand when it comes to quarterbacks this year. It never does, but especially this year.
Scott Wright, everybody, draftcountdown.com.